I'm Nima Rajan. A new study suggests a majority of Canadians are concerned about the spread of COVID-19 in schools, and they want children and staff to wear masks. A countrywide survey of 1,000 people was conducted by the Canadian Hub for Applied and Social Research at the University of Saskatchewan. Even though 89% of respondents said they were vaccinated, 70% said they were still concerned about the spread of the virus in schools in their area, and 78% supported wearing masks in schools. It appears a majority of Canadians think long-term care homes do not currently provide enough safe and reliable care. A survey conducted by the National Institute on Aging will help shape new national standards for long-term care services being drafted by the Health Standards Organization. 67% of respondents did not feel long-term care homes in Canada provide safe, reliable, and high-quality care. That number topped 75% for people who identified as family members, friends, or unpaid caregivers to residents in long-term care. The Trudeau government last year asked the Health Standards Organization to refresh its LTC standards, and the first draft is to be made public early next year. Washington's new COVID travel regulations take effect next month. Canadians immunized with 2 doses of AstraZeneca will be permitted to visit the United States. What this means for those with mixed doses isn't clear. More than 3.9 million Canadians have 2 different doses of Health Canada-approved COVID-19 vaccines. The Public Health Agency of Canada says 1.6 million received AstraZeneca, followed by an mRNA vaccine. Global Affairs Canada says it's working with partners, the U.S. included, to advocate for the recognition of Canada's successful science-based vaccination strategy. Parks Canada is rethinking what the plaques at Prime Minister's grave sites should say and reflect. This is especially in light of historical mistreatment of Indigenous peoples. Experts say this will inevitably cause tension about how to mark the 16 sites. Indigenous leaders say the process will not be easy and will be very uncomfortable. Parks Canada says the wording on the revamped plaques will recognize the enormous shifts in historical understanding, and they will reflect on the past in the context of the present. A top doctor and a Quebec-based bioengineering firm believe history was made last month. This was when an unmanned drone carried a set of lungs for transplant to Toronto General Hospital. Dr. Shaf Khashoggi, the University Health Network Surgeon-in-Chief, says it's believed the trip from Toronto Western Hospital was the first time lungs for transplant have been transported using a drone. But he and Unitaire Bioelectronique are convinced the method will become the norm as the race to get organs up in the sky heats up. Aside from the Quebec-based company, U.S. companies Mission Go, AD Airlines, Laris Pro Transport, and China's EHang are all working on making organ drone flights more common. A U.S. customs dispute at the U.S.-Canada border is threatening the U.S. supply of Alaska pollock. The fish are used for popular products like fish sticks and fast food sandwiches. After being caught, pollock is transported by ship to New Brunswick, near the U.S. border with Maine. The U.S. Customs and Border Agency alleges that shippers are violating the Jones Act. It requires goods shipped between U.S. ports to be transported on U.S.-owned ships. The dispute has left 26 million pounds of fish in Canadian cold storage. Parks Canada has confirmed wild pigs, which tear up landscapes and eat everything from roots to bird eggs to deer, are now regularly present in Elk Island National Park east of Edmonton. The pigs were brought to Canada in the 1990s as a farm diversification strategy. Some escaped, and scientists say they are now in half of Saskatchewan's rural municipalities and 28 Alberta counties. Ryan Brook at the University of Saskatchewan says the pigs are highly destructive to both native wildlife and their habitat. Canadian food banks faced a second pandemic-era Thanksgiving, and they say the pandemic's 4th wave have put a stop to large-scale events. This includes in-person food drives that are typically held at Thanksgiving. However, these drives are needed to keep the doors open year-round. Rachel Dixon, the Director of Development for Feed Ontario, a collective of hunger relief organizations, says demand is particularly worrying because financial donations have slowed. As government support for those affected by the pandemic tapers off, she says the food bank expects to see more people rely on it. The Nobel Prize for Outstanding Work in the field of economics has been awarded to Canadian David Card and two U.S.-based economists. The Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences praised the trio for reshaping empirical work in the economic sciences. Mr. Card says one of his new studies looked at how an increase in the minimum wage might affect hiring in two U.S. states. Mr. Card shares the honor with Joshua Angrists of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and Guido Imbens of Stanford University. All right, we'll be back after the break with more news from around the world. Stay tuned. Residents of Alberta head to the polls for the municipal election on October 18th. This is where voters will also be able to vote on issues of public interest. And one referendum question is about Canada's commitment to equalization, which is currently a hot topic in Alberta. According to Alberta's provincial website, equalization gives federal funding to provinces less well off so that all provinces can provide a similar level of service to their citizens. This funding mainly comes from federal taxes and fees. The referendum is asking Albertans whether they think the principle of equalization payments should be removed from Canada's constitution. While the Alberta provincial government cannot force the federal government to act, it can start a discussion. And the Canadian Taxpayers Federation federal director says that is a much-needed conversation. He joins us now on Forum Daily. Sir, welcome back to Forum Daily, Mr. Franco Terrazzano.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
So let's start with a quick overview of this referendum. What is it about and why is it a hot topic in Alberta?
Well, Albertans are tired of being treated like the cash cow for the rest of Canada. Since equalization was first started in 1957, equalization has cost Alberta taxpayers about $67 billion. This year alone, equalization will cost an Alberta family of four about $2,600. Now, what has all that money bought for Albertans? Well, hostility from the federal government towards its economic driver.
All right, sir, just about 4 minutes here. But before we move forward, can you briefly explain equalization to our viewers and why provinces have to pay equalization payments?
Yeah, equalization is a federal program and it's sold to Canadians as a way so that provincial governments can provide reasonably similar level of programs across Canada. Now, that sounds nice in theory, but in practice, it forces provincial taxpayers like those in Alberta to directly subsidize politicians in other provinces like Quebec who seem intent on roadblocking their development.
All right, sir. So I'm going to jump to an article in the Toronto Sun. You indicate in it that the discussion on equalization is urgently needed. So why is that?
Yeah, this discussion is also needed all across Canada. We have to remember that this is a federal program and the federal government is $1 trillion in debt. And we've seen these equalization costs soaring. When it was first implemented in 1957, it cost about $1.3 billion. This year, it will cost about $21 billion. So a 1,500% increase. Now, with these massive additional costs, is it really making Canada better off? I would argue no. Not only does it harm taxpayers in provinces like Alberta, but it also harms taxpayers in provinces that receive equalization because it lets their politicians put in bad policies and rely more on tax dollars from other provinces and less on good, sound economic policies.
All right, sir. And you also say that the Prairies have been dealing with economic hardships for the past 6 years. So that's even before the pandemic. Why is that?
That's correct. And, you know, all Canadians have been struggling for the last 18 months or so with COVID-19, but Albertans have been struggling for the last 6+ years. And when many Alberta families may have been looking for a hand up, the federal government gave Alberta a boot to the neck, right? The feds have rejected the Northern Gateway pipeline. They moved the goalposts on the Energy East pipeline. They imposed a No More Pipelines law, a discriminatory tanker ban on the West Coast. The feds have imposed a carbon tax. They're getting ready for a second carbon tax. So to many Albertans who feel like they have over-contributed to the rest of Canada through their tax dollars, these policies certainly feel unfair.
So with the pandemic in play now, how does Alberta's economy compare to that of other provinces following these issues that you just mentioned?
Well, I think when we start talking about this economic recovery post-pandemic, what we have to remember is that even after the pandemic, these roadblocks from the federal government are still going to be there for Alberta and also just our natural resource sector in Canada more broadly. So if we want to get the economy firing on all cylinders again post-pandemic, we need to see these roadblocks addressed. And really, that's why it's so important to have this national conversation.
All right, Mr. Terrazzano, just about a minute left here, but the CTF has done some analysis on equalization as it relates to Alberta in particular. So what were some of the key findings here?
Yeah, so since its inception in 1957, equalization has cost Alberta taxpayers about $67 billion. And the last penny that Albertans have received from equalization was all the way back in 1965. This year, equalization will cost an Alberta family of four about $2,600. But we have to remember, equalization is only one of the federal programs that redistributes money away from Alberta taxpayers. If you look at all the money the federal government taxes and spends, well, then Albertans have paid about $600 billion more to Ottawa, and by extension, the other provinces, than they've received back in federal spending. And they still have politicians in these other provinces that want to roadblock their development, and that's just unfair.
All right, Mr. Terrazzano, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Hey, it was my pleasure.
We'll be right back after the break with a look at stories from across Canada, including BC residents that are urged to get the What 3 Words app. That and more coming up next. An emergency dispatcher is encouraging everyone in BC to download a new geolocation app called What 3 Words because it could be a lifesaver. Jody Cohen says the technology, already used in 8 other provinces and 2 territories, is especially good for backcountry skiers and hikers in case of emergency. The free app divides the world into 3-meter squares and gives each a unique combination of 3 random words. This lets first responders pinpoint a person's exact location. A spokesman for BC's health agency says the province is opening its Get Vaccinated registration portal to children ages 5 to 11 for the COVID-19 vaccine. Jeffrey Ferrier says although parents can now register their kids to get the shot, it is still unclear when it will be approved for children by Health Canada. Premier John Horgan has said officials in BC are working on the logistics of delivering the vaccines to children if and when that approval comes. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney gave thanks for Alberta's healthcare workers on Thanksgiving Monday. In his Thanksgiving statement, Mr. Kenney said, "Thanksgiving is a time when we reflect on all that we have and give thanks." He said this year we should all be thankful for those healthcare workers who have faced the 4th wave of COVID-19 in hospitals and ICUs. Opposition leader Rachel Notley also gave thanks to healthcare workers as well as every Albertan who has done their part to help fight the spread of COVID-19. The Saskatchewan Health Authority says it is limiting the number of family members who can be present in critical care units. This is due to the extremely high number of patients. The province's health delivery agency says all provincial ICU patients will be able to designate only 2 essential family or support people with just 1 person present at a time. The SHA says there are now more patients in ICUs across the province than there have been at any other time during the pandemic, and the vast majority of them are COVID-19 positive. The Chief Public Health Officer for the Northwest Territories has declared a workplace COVID-19 outbreak at the Legislature building in Yellowknife. There have been 6 confirmed and 2 probable COVID-19 infections in people who were at the Legislature between Monday and Friday last week. Yellowknife Public Health says it's following up with all known contacts. London, Ontario is mourning the death of its town crier. Bill Paul died over the weekend at the age of 56, or rather 66. Friends remember him as a jolly presence in the city, always looking to spread joy. Mourners will be able to pay their respects at a virtual celebration of life for Mr. Paul, and it is set for this coming Sunday. An outbreak of COVID-19 at a school in Canada's largest city has prompted Toronto Public Health to order the first whole school dismissal of the academic year. The agency isn't saying how many cases have been confirmed at Silverthorne Collegiate Institute, only that new infections were reported on the weekend, and that there may have been exposure at multi-grade events. So all students at the West End School are moving to fully remote learning effective immediately. Ontario healthcare advocates are speaking out on the potential for low staff numbers. Hundreds of Ontario workers in hospitals and long-term care facilities could be off the job in the coming weeks. This if they do not get vaccinated against COVID-19 before the November 15th deadline. The president of a union representing workers in long-term care, hospitals, and retirement homes says vaccine mandates will make the staffing problem worse. The situation is already impacted by low wages, lack of full-time jobs, and poor work conditions, which all predates the pandemic. Meanwhile, unvaccinated nurses in Quebec were already facing suspension without pay, and now the province's nurses' order says their licenses will also be suspended. The decision came only a few days ahead of the province's October 15th deadline. This is when unvaccinated employees in the health sector face suspension without pay. Health Minister Christian Dubé has urged various professional orders of the healthcare workers last week to suspend the licenses of those who have not been vaccinated. And he says he welcomes the order's decision. The Nova Scotia legislature will open its fall sitting today, with all 55 members there in person for the speech from the throne. It will be the first meeting since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. The throne speech will spell out the legislative plan for the province's new progressive conservative government. The party swept to power in the August election on promises to fix Nova Scotia's healthcare system. The University of Prince Edward Island is setting up a medical school with help from Memorial University in Newfoundland and Labrador. UPEI officials say the two schools will develop a joint Doctor of Medicine degree. They say the new Faculty of Medicine at UPEI will initially provide seats for 20 island students annually. This includes at least one seat for an Indigenous student. The school is expected to welcome its first class in September 2023. All right, after the break, we will take a look at stories happening around the world. Pharma company Merck reaches out to the FDA to approve its anti-COVID pill. A deadly storm hits the Philippines, and Tigray forces say Ethiopia has launched a major offensive. We'll have these stories and more when we come back from break. Merck has asked American regulators to authorize its promising antiviral COVID pill. If cleared by the Food and Drug Administration in the United States, it would be the first pill shown to treat COVID-19. This adds a new, easy-to-use weapon to the world's arsenal against the pandemic. Most Americans across party lines have serious concerns about cyber attacks on U.S. computer systems, and they view China and Russia as major threats. That's according to a new poll by the Pearson Institute and the Associated Press Nork Center for Public Affairs Research. It found that about 9 in 10 Americans are at least somewhat concerned about hacks that involve their personal information, financial institutions, government agencies, or certain utilities. The International Monetary Fund expressed full confidence in its managing director. This is in response to allegations that World Bank staff were pressured to change business climate rankings for China in an effort to appease Beijing. The IMF's executive board said in a statement that its review did not conclusively demonstrate that managing director Kristalina Georgieva played an improper role in the situation in her former role as a top official of the World Bank. However, it said the investigation into possible misconduct by World Bank staff was continuing. Austria has a new chancellor. Austria's president on Monday swore in Alexander Schellenberg, the former foreign minister, as chancellor. Mr. Kurz announced Saturday that he would step aside to defuse a political crisis. It was triggered when prosecutors announced that the former chancellor is one of the targets of an investigation into suspected bribery and breach of trust. The European Union and Britain are back to quarreling less than a year after finalizing Brexit. Britain wants changes to the deal it reached on trade in Northern Ireland. The EU insists on keeping the essence of the deal. France wants more fishing licenses from London, but the UK is holding back. Brussels is seen in London as conniving to undermine a successful Brexit. Meanwhile, EU officials are admonishing the British government for not respecting the deal that it signed. A tropical storm set off landslides and flash flooding as it barreled over the tip of the northern Philippines overnight. Officials say 9 people died and 11 are missing. Hundreds were evacuated in places swamped by floods and battered by pounding rains and winds from Tropical Storm Kompasu. Coast Guard personnel rescued people trapped in flooded homes. Forecasters said the storm was over the South China Sea as of Tuesday. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has reviewed missiles. that were developed to launch nuclear strikes. And he vowed to build an invincible military to cope with what he called persistent American hostility. In his speech, he stressed he isn't targeting South Korea and that there shouldn't be another war pitting Koreans against each other. North Korea has resumed missile tests after a 6-month hiatus, but has also offered conditional talks with South Korea. Iran has kicked off a massive 2-day air defense drill in the country's sprawling central desert in another show of force by the Islamic Republic. State TV reported that both the Army and the paramilitary Revolutionary Guard are taking part in the annual maneuvers dubbed Valiat. Iran regularly holds such drills. The current exercise comes as the wider Mideast region remains on edge over Iran's escalating nuclear program. Mexico's president has presented details of a plan that is likely to squeeze out private power-generating plants, and it may provoke complaints under the Mexico-U.S.-Canada Free Trade Accord. The constitutional reform presented by President Andrés Manuel López Obrador would cancel contracts under which 34 private plants sell power into the national grid. Among other things, it guarantees the government utility a market share of at least 54%. Tigray forces say Ethiopia's government has launched its threatened major military offensive against them in an attempt to end a nearly year-old war. A statement from the Tigray External Affairs Office alleged that hundreds of thousands of Ethiopian regular and irregular fighters launched a coordinated assault on several fronts. The Tigray statement could not immediately be confirmed amid communications cuts in conflict zones. The number of miners who risked their lives to cross the inhospitable stretch of land that separates Colombia and Panama has reached a record high. UNICEF said Monday that 19,000 miners crossed the Darien Gap between January and September. The figure is almost triple the total for the last 5 years. UNICEF says that at least 1 in 5 migrants who walked the area were children, half of those under the age of 5. Israeli archaeologists say they have found a massive ancient winemaking complex. They say it dates back some 1,500 years. The complex was discovered in Yavne, a central town south of Tel Aviv. Israel's Antiquities Authority says the discovery shows that Yavne was a winemaking powerhouse during the Byzantine period. That'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. I'm Nima Rajan, and this was Forum Daily News. We'll see you next time.